Hello and welcome to Adventures in Theater History, where we bring you the best stories from the deep and fascinating history of theater in the city of Philadelphia. I'm your host, Peter Schmitz, and our theme music is by Christopher Mark Colucci. We are continuing our Season 4 of the podcast as we explore the history of the recent decades of Philly theater. And although in this effort, I've talked to a lot of directors and artistic directors. I've been making a real effort lately to gather the memories of other theater artists too, stage managers, musicians, actors, and playwrights. A couple of years ago, I was in a comedy about old folks in Florida. It was called Boca, and it was at Act 2 Playhouse in Ambler. And I was lucky to be working with a group of wonderful folks, all of them veterans of the area stage, with literally hundreds of credits to their name, including Mary Martello, Pat Sabato, and Tony Braithwaite. You may remember that I interviewed one of those cast members, Penelope Reed, during the run of that show, and that our conversation became episode 60 of the podcast. But most of my scenes in Boca, and almost all of my time backstage, was actually with another legendary Philly actor, the great Tom Teti. Now, I had been aware of Tom Teti ever since I had first seen him perform back in 1991 at People's Light and Theater Company in Malvern in playwright Louis Lippa's adaptation of the Theodore Dreiser novel Sister Carrie. Now, I have a quick clip for you here of David Ingram, another actor, dear old friend of mine, who was also in that show and who had joined the company of People's Light in the early 90s. I asked David to tell me his first memory that he ever had of Tom.
You know, when I joined the company from New York, I didn't really know anybody, but when I got to see Tom, it was sort of like, well, who is this? He just had a real wonderful ability to connect with the audience and to just have the audience breathing with him. Early on, I saw him do a show, The Faith Healer, the Brian Friel piece, and he was mesmerizing. And Tom was really one of those extraordinary actors that could just hold the audience in the palm of his hand. It was one of those performances that was so all-encompassing that you kind of, like, when the lights went out, you kind of realized it. I kind of realized I was sort of holding my breath the whole time.
I contacted Tom himself the other day, and I asked him to be on the podcast, and I am so grateful that he readily agreed. Tom and I spoke over Zoom in mid-September of 2025. Tom Teti, welcome to Adventures in Theater History, Philadelphia.
Thank you, Peter Schmitz. It's a pleasure to be with you.
It seems to me, Tom, in this current season, we're talking about the history of Philadelphia theater over the past 50 years. And when I do investigations into the archives, I look at old newspaper stories like every day to see what was going on today in Philadelphia theater history. And I don't know a name that turns up more often than yours. And in the cast was Tom Teti, is one of the sentences I write most often. You have been one of the most consistently hardworking and productive theater actors in the city of Philadelphia over the past 50 years. Is that anything anyone's ever said to you before?
Nobody's ever said that I was hardworking and productive before. They do say my name turns up a lot, but it's a short name, so it's easy to...
It is. It's an Italian name, right?
It is an Italian name.
Yeah.
I tracked ancestry once, and my last name shows up in Albania also.
Okay.
And I was told by someone who was teaching Italian once that there's from the section of the province of Abruzzo, where there's statues to this Thetis or Teti. And then Danny Fruchter complicated things and saying, you must be a descendant of Achilles. Thetis is Achilles' mother. And I don't get in that deep, but it was fascinating to sort of track the name.
Fantastic. Well, what, Tom, is your origin story, as it were?
I was born in South Philadelphia. We moved and lived there till I was 3. We moved when my sister was born to Yeadon, PA, which is just across Cobb's Creek.
Mm-hmm.
From West Philadelphia, and I lived there, went to high school at Monsignor Bonner High School, and then went to Westchester, then State College. So, which, was back in the Stone Age. We were wearing animal skins and
Yes, yes, I've seen those photographs. They're rubbing sticks together in order to crank up the phone. But what was your introduction to the world of theater? Were you doing theater in school?
I'll try to keep this short. No, I did no theater in school. I was a good singer as a boy in public school, and then when I went to Catholic school, we only did hymns and church and all. There wasn't any of that kind of thing, God forbid. So a lot of that was dormant and I studied history in college. I wanted to teach history, we do research and write about history. And when I got out, you went to college, it's time to get a job. And I got a job not teaching history, but teaching in special education, which meant I had to go to school for special education, to take some master's classes for that and to stay certified, to get certified. And as a diversion, because I did a lot of street corner comedy and voices and stuff like that, I was asked to do a play with a girls' high school, Catholic high school. And I did. And somebody in the audience, it was an interesting play called The Scarecrow, which was an old American piece.
Yes,
Yes,
right. Yeah, the first play they did at the new Tomlinson Theater at Temple in 1968 was The Scarecrow.
that's correct. And this would have been about 1971,
Okay,
two.
so it was a popular piece back then.
Yeah. And somebody in the audience had been studied at Hedgerow. She said, why don't you go to Hedgerow and take some classes? I had never heard of it. So about 9 months later, I did. I went as a diversion to an acting class at the Hedgerow Theater. And I was about 3 weeks, I was bit pretty bad.
I know the feeling. Who was your teacher?
My teacher was Dolores Tanner, who was
Aha.
an older woman. You've probably come across the name if
I
you.
just read her dissertation at the University of Texas on the
That's
history
right.
of the Hedgerow Theater. Yeah.
So she was teaching the beginning class. The thing I didn't know was that there was a company that was performing at the theater, but there was a rift between the company and the old guard. So
Right. We talked about that with Penny Reed. Yeah.
I didn't even know they were doing plays down there. So I went to Dolores's class, and she had something she called a teach-in, which was a Saturday night all-nighter, kind of 7:30 to breakfast or whatever.
Wow.
Well, we took a break to go to the Plumstead and drink a little at about 10:30. But I went on the wrong night, and I walked in, and there were all these people around getting dinner and I said, "Is there a teach-in?" And John Loven, who I came to know very well later with People's Light, said, "Nope, performance tonight." Performance. Well, then I went down the hill and I saw Incident at Vichy, which they were performing
So,
in there.
so you went into the Hedgerow house and then where they were
To
having
the
dinner, and then you
right.
walked down to the theater to see
I
what
went
they were
down to the
doing.
theater and saw the play. I go, wow. And I took somebody back there the next week to see the play. And after that, I got into a play at, I was a replacement. I hadn't been a student very long, maybe 4 months or so. And I was a replacement for somebody who left the production of Candida, which was my first play.
Candida, which is a famous production at Hedgerow, like their first show they
Yeah,
ever did back in
that's
1923.
right. That was
Yeah,
very important. And so I had a smallest role of the curate in
right.
Candida. Then I heard about the other company doing a summer season at Westtown School. And I auditioned for Indians, which I had already read
Arthur
because
Coppett, right?
Arthur Coppett. And so I auditioned for that. I was cast in that. Then the play got extended at Hedgerow. I figured I couldn't do it, so I backed out. Then I found out after I was finished with that play that they still needed people for Indians, and so I called up Ken Marini, who was directing, and he said, "Yeah, I still have a part open for Chief Joseph." Chief Joseph was a hero of mine, reading about him. So, as a young 24-year-old, 23-year-old actor, I put on an old voice and I played Chief Joseph in Indians at Westtown School with the Hedgerow Theater Corporation.
Right. But then there was this rift. Although, did you feel like you were being asked to choose sides at some point? Or did you just realize, oh, these are the people that I'm working with. I guess I'm going this way. Was it very
Well,
personal?
there was the feeling that possibly the older guard at Hedgerow, Dolores and then Rose Schulman,
Mhm.
that they wouldn't be pleased with working with that company because they evicted them from the Hedgerow Theater.
Right.
They couldn't go back there. And the summer season at Westtown School with that hedgerow company closed during the run of Indians. And in a prophetic afternoon, where Danny Fruchter, he wanted to become he wanted to run the part of a triumvirate that would run the company. He walked across and said things to everybody. And when he spoke to me, he said, "You're going to play a lot of parts for me." And I thought, this guy is nuts. This is crazy. But Danny was an SDS director at Cornell, so he knew how to rabble rouse, and he could be a pain in the neck. There was something about him that you knew he was never going to stop, and he would organize, he would put something together. And for the next year, he had meetings, he had location scouts, he called people in, and the beginning, and People's Light was shaping up. And so there were 4 founders, and then there was me.
And then and then the name People's Light comes from the guy who was running this sort of lighting business out of the back of his truck, right?
Dick Keeler had the People's Light Company.
Right, and he would just, if you were doing some sort of basement theater, he would show up, have instruments, But so then People's Light and theater was the combination of the technical and then the artistic side. Right. And the first venue they found was way out, even farther into, was it Chester County and Strode's Mill? This renovated mill. They turned it into a theater with a platform at one end. And the first show they chose to do, again, was a show that had a particular history at the Hedgerow, which was The Emperor Jones by Eugene O'Neill. So that was Jasper Dieter's pet project always, and doing the role of Smithers was Jasper Dieter's role. So Danny comes to you and says, "We're going to do the Emperor Jones," and the guy playing the Jones, the actor was named
George Collins.
George Collins, and was he local as well, or did he come from elsewhere?
No, George Collins was part of the Jim Mapp Company, which was an African American musical theater company that was famous for a production of God's Trombones, which was a musical version of an epic poem by James Weldon Johnson.
Right.
So Dick had lit their productions and was high on George. George wanted to become an actor. He'd mostly been a singer. George's origins were in the West Indies. So I think it was Jamaica. I'm not sure. George taught economics at the Henry George School of Economics, I believe.
Henry George, another old Philadelphia name.
Yeah, that's right. That's right. And he played a couple of things with us. And I was a school teacher. I was teaching.
So you still had a day job as a school teacher all this time.
I was a special ed teacher, and for 8 years total. But for about 6 of those years, People's Light was developing, and Danny always kept coming at me with whatever was going on, including me as if I was, But I was the actor. I was the acting company for a while, Peter.
Yeah.
I was the guy. And we tacked on as many people as he knew, or knew people who wanted to come into it. So that's how People's Light got off the ground. Yeah.
But before we get too far down the road, what was it like that first night of doing The Emperor Jones? Who was the audience? What sort of reception were you getting? Because you're way out at this point in the Philadelphia exurb. And around you was farm country. It wasn't built up the way it is now, right? What was it like doing theater way out there?
We were about a mile and a half outside the city limits of Westchester. So there was the Westchester audience from the university, professorial, some students, they came down. There was a big musical contingent in Westchester. A lot of those people came. Wilmington was a nice drive on a summer night. So people came up from Delaware and Chadds Ford and that area. So that's who we were. There were only 65 seats, and we didn't fill them all the time, but it was a respectable amount of attendance. So the people adopted us as, their pet theater, their pet professional theater.
Right. And Danny was, as always, was good at making contacts among corporations or foundations and things. And you guys were collecting names and addresses of anybody who showed up and beginning to build a mailing list, beginning to build a list of patrons and possible donors and things. He was
Yeah.
dynamic and organized that way.
He was very good at picking a board of directors and maintaining a board of directors. And in this case, it was partially people from Hedgerow or new Hedgerow,
Mm-hmm.
and wanted to back what was going on with him, and new people from the Westchester or Delaware area, as well as contacts that he knew from his upbringing and down the main line in Lower Merion. That was kind of tough to get people from Wayne to come out, but some did.
Mm-hmm.
And yeah, he was very good at that and knew what it would take. He knew what the important timbers would in a board of directors to stay under the theater.
Mm-hmm. And you say he was one of a troika. Who were the other two people who were really running things at the time?
When they split from Hedgerow and went out on the People's Light and Theater wagon, then it was, Danny, Dick, Keeler, Kenny, and Dan's first wife, Meg Fruchter, who did costumes. And so those were those four founders, and then there was me kind of off to the side.
Well, it can't just have been one actor all this time. It sounds like you got a lot of Indian chiefs and only one Indian. Who else was working with you?
Well, he would go after people who had been at Hedgerow or people.
Well, you mentioned John Lovin, and was he married to Marcia Saunders?
John Lovin came down to Chester Springs when we moved up to Yellow Springs, and John and Marcia Saunders, who were a couple then. Steve Novelli, who had been in Indians as well. In fact, Steve took the part that they originally gave to me, and he got out of Villanova, so Steve Novelli was involved, and some people who came from Westchester College theater scene, Corinne Corcoran and Larry Moses, and Tom Wright, who went on to be a sort of a cohort of John Sayles films. So we gathered people, held on to some, gathered some more. People like George Spillane, who was a professor at community college and had done a lot of theater already. So we started to get more experienced.
Elda Cortez, did she join at this point?
Alda came when Danny was organizing the move from Strode's Mill up to Yellow Springs. Mm-hmm. He had brought in a production of the Pocket Playhouse.
Yes, which Joe Canuso was telling us about. Yeah,
that's right. Joe was in that show, a Pinter play. I don't know which one.
Right.
I don't remember which one, but Alda was in it, and she decided to make the move too, and didn't get on the stage until we went to Yellow Springs. But she was involved in that organization. Yeah.
Okay. So, did you ever consider leaving to work elsewhere, or is it like, this is where I work, this is the people I work with, I have a job here, I have a family connections here, I'm staying here?
Not while I was teaching, also, because my life was, I was teaching school, I was rehearsing at night and on weekends and playing on the Thursday, Friday, Saturdays when we had a small performance schedule, and I did not consider leaving all that until the theater had decided to purchase the land in Malvern.
But you weren't only working. The next time your name has really popped up in my files, and I found this when you and I were working together a couple of years ago, was in 1977. This is not at People's Light. You were doing Lenny, the play about Lenny Bruce, the one-man show in Philadelphia, in Old City, right? In a tiny little...
Yeah, that was a bounce from it. It was done at People's Light.
Oh, it was. Okay.
So it was in Yellow Springs. It was enormously popular. And Danny had a connection with a supper club owner of a place called Cobblestones at 5th and Spruce. So then we rehearsed again, re-rehearsed with some new people, and moved the whole production down in 1977 to, we did a spring production of Lenny down there.
Right. Was that after Dustin Hoffman had done the movie version of it, or was that already out there?
Yes.
Yes, right.
The first production, which was the fall of 76, we had that movie had been out, and people were throwing their names together.
Right. But then, so you put it on. You memorize this enormous, take on this huge character. I have a quote from a review. It says, Lenny, parentheses Teddy, is there in front of you in a real nightclub. He comes up to you in the audience, white and ferret-faced and frenzied. He paces across the stage, spitting out dirty-mouthed insults at church and state with the driving anger of a man who hates cant and hypocrisy in any form. And he is very, very funny.
That was me, huh?
Yeah.
Oh, wow. I wonder where that was. Where was that review?
Well, that was in the. It might have been the Daily News, but I would go see that show. I mean, I don't know if I liked being called white and ferret-faced and frenzied, but not unapt for the character you were playing.
No, it was very popular and very successful.
But it was an extreme kind of '70s play. You had to pretend to do drugs on stage and things, right? And
Yeah, and we had to have people who pretended to be a band with air instruments, and it was an accomplishment in the imagination of Ken Marini, and I just I stood up there with those routines. A lot of people came to see it because it broke the mold for being a highbrow, being theater in the Philadelphia suburbs or even in Philadelphia. And, there was Lenny Bruce.
yeah, so this wasn't just a Chad's Ford type of thing.
I mentioned
Gritty and urban and foul mouthed and
Yeah.
not what people were expecting from Chester County. So the theater company moves to this barn, this farm, near a train track and underneath these huge electrical wires. Even then, I think we're going right above it. But
Right.
still, a mainly rural setting. And they built this stage. The earliest show they remember doing there, it looks like you were in the first show, Rashomon, the Japanese memory play.
That's right. Yes. And it was, we remember opening night, we were still apologizing to people if the don't telling them not to touch the back wall because the paint might not be dry.
Oh,
So, and the fire marshal came in about an hour before the show and said, "Okay, you can do it.
right.
You're all right. We met the standards." And so that was what happened there.
Who else was in that company?
Alda Cortez, Catherine McNeil, who was a big part of the company for a while, and then went to the West Coast. A guy from Villanova, Danny Baker, Jim Burton, who was one of Kathy's, was Kathy's husband, I think, at the time. John Loven, myself. I think that might have been.
And you had to do rather elaborate sword fights through all that. No one, that's the whole point of the play. There's a huge sword fight at the
Yeah,
climax.
the samurai. We did samurai sword fighting. We had samurai instructions. And I don't know if this was a wise decision, but we used practice swords, which were bamboo. And they made a tremendously loud noise when they hit each other. And so we were, it was, I'm sure it went over, but I remember learning to be a samurai swordsman. Yeah.
Yeah. In the early 1980s, PLTC, as we'll shorten it, Danny starts a new play festival. One of the first theater companies to really invest in, I'm doing sort of what Robert Headley had been doing, encouraging local plays and playwrights and saying, we'll stage these plays and starting a summer festival. And again, judging from the newspaper stories I found, you were almost always in it.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, it was all hands on deck for the
Yeah.
new festivals, and Danny would make a trip to Humana every year
Right.
and try and pluck out some things that he thought would be good for us, as well as some new stuff from the Philadelphia area and Philadelphia playwrights. So yeah, and we that became pretty much a summer expectation. Yeah.
Right. But who are some of the playwrights and people you remember working with? It seems to me you did a play called Groves of Academe with Pierce Bunting, a young actor named Pierce Bunting.
Yeah, the interesting story there is Pierce was the ASM on the show, and the actor who had been to Temple, Eric Hill, and moved on. He was then a part of the Milwaukee company, but the Milwaukee Rep, but he came back to do that play, and then had some problems at home and had to leave. And we were at the stage where we'd say that was a Mark Stein play, and we said we had a little meeting with the director, and the director said to me, "I think we should ask Pierce. He's been in every rehearsal, and see if he's good, and if he is, we'll show it to Danny, and then Danny will decide." So
and Pierce was down with that. Pierce was like, "Yeah, I could do."
Pierce had already been an actor, and he was he'd done some acting. So he said, "Yeah, sure." And now, if you know Pierce at all, Pierce, like always, like, "Yeah, sure." Nothing is. He has big shoulders. We had a couple of rehearsals, so we showed it to Danny, and Danny asked him a couple of questions, and he said, "Go." So in 8 days later, a star was born.
Yeah, and you were there. But at any point, did you think, I can move on. I can take this act. I'm now a pretty experienced actor. I've got a nice number of big roles under my. I should go on to New York. I should go out to LA, see what I can do. Did that ever tempt you? You've stopped teaching by this point, right?
I stopped teaching. No, I believed it was something I was part of building this organization. I didn't think about moving. I did think about working other places and branching out when I wasn't needed. Philadelphia Company was the first place I went to with a production called Nuts. And I worked with Sarah Goranczyk as a director of about half a dozen times. And the Walnut, Bernard Havard came in, reopened the Walnut. I was in that, I think, the first show that he produced, which was A Flea in Her Ear.
Right.
And I never was interested in living in New York. California was a whole different thing. And later on, I did flirt with that idea. But no, I wanted to stay there. I wanted to do other theaters, other productions. But leaving the child, People's Light, that we had conceived, that was not ever something I wanted to do entirely.
So what was the exciting reason to hang around Philadelphia in the 1980s? You felt like you didn't need to go elsewhere. You were doing shows like Nuts at Philadelphia Theater Company. You did 5th of July there at Plays and Players, when it was still called the Philadelphia Company. You worked on the play Tom Paine there with Richard Thomas. You were at the Wilma too. I see you did Bill Cracker in the musical Happy End at the Wilma.
Oh yeah, that's right. I did 2 shows. Maybe there were 2 of the last shows at the maybe not, but I did 2 shows in a row at the Wilma, and I remember went in for that audition. I had done a couple of Brecht, Kurt Weill shows, and we did Bill Cracker, and then I did Passion by Peter Nichols there at that location, and then it was a long time before I worked at the Wilma again.
By the 1990s, the People's Light and Theater was expanding. They'd gotten a lot of big grants from various foundations and corporations, and they were able to really expand the company to, it seemed to me, about 20 people for some projects. And 2 of them, and another person that was working then was Abby.
Right.
Abigail Adams. Was a director, and I first met her because she was she was brought up as an Alexander teacher into the NYU graduate acting program. It's one of the things that she did. After she worked as a director a little bit there with some of my classmates, although not with me. But after my class graduated in 1987, and I was living in Brooklyn with a guy named David Ingram, and at a certain point, he and another classmate, a guy, Frank Wood, said, "We've been hired by People's Light and Theater to be a member of their company. We're going down to Philadelphia, or not even Philadelphia, the Philadelphia suburbs." And I was like, "What? What are you doing? This is insane. We're right here. We're in New York. This is what we want to be doing." They're saying, "Well, Peter, we're not getting cast as often as we need to be. This is a permanent company. This is a great opportunity. We're going." And I was like, "All right. But I remember coming down to Philadelphia on the train in 1991 to see this huge, ambitious production of Sister Carrie, an adaptation of Theodore Dreiser's famous novel.
You saw it?
I did, and it was. I mean, I had seen Nicholas Nickleby when it was produced in New York, when the Royal Shakespeare Company came, and it was on that scale. We're doing not just a condensation of the novel; we're doing the whole thing. It's going to be a 2-part evening. It's going to take 6-7 hours. We've got a cast of thousands. Everybody knows 5 or 6 parts. We will spin the universe around us. You ended up playing the title character's rather shady lover, Mr. Hurstwood, right? Yeah. And tell us about the months in preparation and all the cast building for that project.
Well, it was such a gutsy thing for Danny to decide to do, where we took off several months to rehearse. The corporate center with all these businesses was growing, and Downingtown was growing. There was people were moving out. It was a kind of a confluence of a perfect storm for this location, and it was just an amazing experience because the people. I remember people coming and going to dinner on a Saturday and then coming back, and you'd sometimes see them out there having dinner after part 1, and people would say, "We can't wait to go back." It was a compelling sort of classic literature soap opera produced for everyone. It was a big undertaking and a splendid accomplishment.
Yeah, well, it told a huge, important story about American urbanization, about the move from the countryside to the city, about the growth of factories, about the change in social mores, and at the end, it was about the beginning of American show business, because she ends up becoming a showgirl, right?
That's right, and the decline of the shady lover, George Hurstwood.
Right.
I always
you had a tragic end, as I recall.
Yeah, I did. What's the use? But I remember that we would do part 1 Saturday afternoon, part 2 Saturday night, and Sunday we'd do the same thing. And I remember waking up on Sunday morning and realizing it is really hard to tell a long story all over again.
But you did it. You were, all of you, and because you had each other to depend upon. It was quite an astounding company, and I can testify, having seen it, it was very engaging. It was absolutely equivalent of the Nicholas Nickleby that the RSC had done, but in an American context, and in a very surprising place. I remember taking the train way out into sort of the green suburbs, going, this is not where I would expect to see a show of this size and scope. But there it was.
And the National Theatre came to look at it.
The National Theatre in London.
Yes, they came out, and it was decided that either the production or the cast or whatever, it was not to be. We never made that.
Missed opportunity there. But that wasn't the only ambitious new theater group in town, because in 1993, I noticed you played Sweeney Todd in this tiny space behind St. Stephen's Church, just off of 10th Street, with this group called the Arden Theater Company. Do I have that right? The Arden Theater?
You remember them correctly.
Yeah.
They were very savvy young men and women who came out from Northwestern. And they took a look. They came out to see everything. They asked me about something that I don't remember what it was. I wasn't available. But they were very nice to me, and very, very driven. And those 2 directors, Terry and Aaron, were very, very smart. Very, very smart.
Terry Nolan and Aaron Posner. Yeah.
Yeah. And I think actually the first show I did with them was Tally's Folly, which was with Aaron, and that was first. And that was also done. We co-produced it, and it came out to People's Light. And then there was Sweeney Todd, and I really wanted to do that and a musical.
Well, sure, but this was famously a production that was on a huge scale. You know, Hal Prince had staged it on an enormous stage with enormous sets, and you guys are doing it in a tiny little corner of an old church hall. How'd you pull it off?
The musicians were up above us behind a scrim. I don't know, but it was great. It was a terrific thing to do. It was cozy and spectacular in the way it was crammed in, and I just loved it. I took to it, and
How did you sing? That's quite a role to sing. Were you vocal? You had the vocal chops for all that?
I went to a vocal teacher out in Westchester. Actually, she was retired. She was great.
Who was that?
Stella Conaway was her name, and she was really good to me. And really, I didn't know the music, but I'd sung on stage before, but I'd never done a quote unquote musical. So here's my first musical, which is 12 of probably the most demanding songs you've ever heard.
Yep.
And and then after that, I did about 5 more with Terry, and
a little night music too, right?
Little night music, The Baker's Wife, Forum, and Into the Woods.
But that was all over at their new space over on 2nd Street.
The new space too.
Yeah, because they moved out and then the Lantern Theater moved in there. But in 1994, you're now working with another person that I'm hoping to talk to soon. Carol Rockamora has started the Philadelphia Festival for New Plays, and they're working out in West Philadelphia at the Zellerbach and at the smaller theater there. You did Uncle Vanya there with another classmate of mine, Julia Gibson.
Lovely. Yes, that what took me back to Hedgerow in the very beginning, because Dolores and Rose, when they taught, always assigned, we were all working on Chekhov, Shaw, O'Neill, Miller, all of this stuff that would seem to be very difficult, but it really was a great primer for young actors, because it demanded a lot of you, and they knew a lot about it. So I'd done some Uncle Vanya before. I'd done Astroff, or but only in scene work. But I was familiar, very familiar. So that was a great opportunity. Carol was funny because she would call you.
She translated the productions. It was her own translation, right? She knew Russian.
She was very good at her versions of Chekhov and Russian were very good, and she wanted to direct it too, and so she called some of us in just to read the script so she could hear her work, and then she'd fall in love. Carol was this way; she fell in love with your reading of it, and so then I got to play it. So so remember,
good for her.
In it, yeah. Lou playing Lou Lipa was in it. Serpiokov,
the professor who everyone's mad at. Yeah. But so you're very much the go-to leading man in town in the 1990s. I see the upstairs of the Walnut. You were playing Bart Giamatti in a play, my old college Prexy, right?
With padded suit, yeah.
And Tom McCarthy was playing Bud Selig, right?
No, he was Fay Vincent.
Oh, Fay Vincent, yes, right. We ended up taking over for him after Bart passed away, right. And then you played Don Juan for Ken Marini again. He had started a theater up in Cheltenham in the northern suburbs, right? And you played Judge Brack and Hedda Gabler at the Arden. So I don't want to make you talk about every play you've ever done, because after a while it's like, and then I did. There literally must be hundreds and hundreds of plays you've done in Philadelphia. Have you ever counted?
No, someday I probably will. We'll try to sit down and figure that out. And probably I'll be using your material to help figure it.
Yeah, my resources are there for you, Tom. I'll do my best.
But 50 years People's Live with this celebration, we did try to count. And one of the things that happened is they didn't have full rosters of the new play festival. So there were some years where I did 4 or 5 things within the festival. And what do you count that as? But I know it's in excess of 150 to 200 up out here at People's Light, and then you live long enough, you get a lot of stuff.
Well, and if you work enough. But I mean, some people live long and think like, those 5 shows I did, but you're pushing 300 or 400. I mostly try and keep the conversation for this season in the late 20th century, although I'm not good at maintaining my own rule. I often end up in the 21st century, despite my best efforts. Partly because once we get in the 21st century, it just expands to such a size, and I will never be able to cover it, and I'll be leaving people out. And I don't know whether people are actually mad that they're not on the podcast. I hope not. I'm trying to be inclusive, but I can only do so much. Well, what's some of the work you found yourself doing as the 21st century arrived? I mean, everything you did between 2000 and Boca, you and me sitting there at what sticks out in your mind?
Well, the pantos for
Well, the
the
pantos of people, yeah, People's Light started doing British style pantomimes for their Christmas show.
right people's light branched out and did one of the smartest things they've ever done, and thanks to Abby and she had studied, of course, at RADA
So by
and
that time, Abby had taken over the
yeah,
People's Light because Danny had a horrible personal tragedy and had moved on, right? Yeah,
yeah, and he couldn't figure out exactly how to fit in, and when he decided that he wanted back on that, but he was out with Coatesville and doing a lot of international connecting.
right. Well, we did. He did that show. He did the Kabuki Macbeth. They took the company out to Crete. They took it to Hungary. Right.
Right,
He did the Gospel at Colonus that he did with the choir
right,
out in Coatesville. So he was involved, but there had been a tragic thing where his son had been killed
yeah.
in an accident, and it was very hard for him, understandably. So Abby, by this point, was had taken over leadership. Am I right about that?
Yes, Abby and Greg Rowe. Greg also left to go to Pew
Hmm.
and get money instead of ask for money.
Sure.
so, so, and then Greg passed away too soon
Right.
after that. But Ab was in charge, and we started in actually an out of the box festival with Dick Whittington and his cat was a sort of a short panto in that, and I loved the out of the box festival, both of them, well, the one in particular, the first one, and then the pantos became our holiday go to, and that was a revelation, and I loved doing it. I loved every one of them, and
And how were audiences responding to? So these were very British. This style of panto with the children's story, the fairy tale that's adapted into a sort of a wacky story.
mhm,
There's one guy playing the Dame character, which was always Mark Lazar was always the company member was always doing that, and he was extremely talented. A large, huge man from Wisconsin, but he ends up being a classic, British pantomime Dame. There's always other cross-dressing. There's always candy being thrown out of the audience. There's always a big messy scene. There's big musical numbers. There's surprises. And this would be the thing that families would then begin to plan their holidays around. We'll go and see the panto. I remember taking my kids out to see it. Yeah. But there's another thing you've started doing at this point is that you've started writing yourself, but not plays.
no, no, it was in I suddenly in the late 90s I started to put stories down, and I think it was because I discovered a word processor, and because writing by hand was exhausting, ugly, time consuming, very difficult, and some writer friends I have only write by hand and then they transpose onto, but it's funny because I'm kind of a luddite when it comes to everything else. But if it weren't for the word processor and the computer, I don't know if I would have become a writer. And I started to write, and I joined up, and by a funny coincidence, not a funny happenstance, I was told about a writers group called the Rittenhouse Writers Group in Philadelphia. And about 2000, 99 or 2000, I joined up with them, or I was allowed to join them. And I've been in that group off and on for those 25 years. So, yeah, I started to write fiction.
Well, I was the other night. I went out to Malvern to see a reading of you, and it was at a Oriental rug store, beautiful place, lovely place, and along the main strip there in Malvern, and you had a public. Tom, there was a bluegrass band playing and a fun ensemble, and there were all these chairs set up, and people just kept flocking in till the place was full, and they were just there to hear you read a story which they'd already heard, but already heard you read. This was one of your classic stories. It was a story about a father dealing with his son, and the son was recording the father tell the story from his youth, and it was all about going to Catholic school and this tree that he planted, which he thought was cut down, then he realized it's still there. And you read it along with another person playing the part of the son, and everyone was just there to see you, Tom. There was such affection coming at you from the audience. You've developed a following as a writer. Where do you get published often, or is it all? Is it reading these works? Is that the venue for sharing the short stories you write?
That's lovely of you to say and to mention. I have been published maybe about 10 times. The short pieces. The first group of things that were published was in a Delaware County newspaper called the County Press. So I published in some small journals, and I got into a few anthologies also. And then I decided I'm going to combine the two things that I can do. One is I like to read aloud in public, and sort of inspired a little bit by swimming to Cambodia.
Spalding Gray.
And I went to see Spalding Gray, who reads memoirish kinds of things.
Yes.
All right. But he sits there with his binder, and it's spellbinding. And I said, I'm going to try and do this. And that's what I do.
But so all this time, but it's now through into the 2000s, into the early 2020s. You're still acting, you're still working. How old are you now, Tom, if you don't mind telling us?
I turned, I'm 76.
Okay. All right. A good number. But you're about to do another run of, now, because we just talked to Joe Canuso about this, but Ray Didinger's played Tommy and Me, right?
Yeah.
Out of People's Light, where you're playing the sports writer.
I'm playing Tommy.
You're playing Tommy.
I play the older Tommy.
Oh, I see.
And the younger Tommy is the guy named Frank Nardi Jr.
I know Frank. He's a student of mine from UArts.
That's right. And so Matt Pfeiffer plays Ray.
I see.
And there's a young man in it who plays the young Ray. So
Okay.
it's two characters, 4 actors, and the 2 characters are divided in half.
So how do you feel, getting out? You've now been doing this for over 50 years. Something you sort of fell into because you went to the wrong meeting. You showed up on the wrong night. And now here it's 50 years later. What does it feel like to look back but still be able to look forward as well? I'm going to keep doing this.
I always say I don't want to be the last one to know it's time to stop. Like I said, when I was studying acting, I said, as long as I keep getting encouragement, I'm going to keep doing this. And I did. And as long as somebody says, hey, you want to do this, I'll do it. And then, I think when it's time to not do it, I hope there's that it's a gentle sort of cool down rather than a crash. But I still feel like, okay, I can do this, and I will.
And looking at all these dozens and dozens of theater companies in the Philadelphia area, almost all of which you've worked with at one point or another, do you look at that and say, hey, I helped build this? I was part of something that was worth doing. And
Peter, you hit on it. Because I do look at that. I do look at the 70s, the late 70s, the early 80s, and then into the 80s and into the 90s, and think, yes. And I do feel you're right. Like, yeah, I helped to do this.
Oh, that's fantastic. Well, that's a great place to end, Tom. And you're smiling at me, and it's wonderful to see you. I hope to see you again in person whenever you're doing the next story reading or anything, or I'll come see your show. Better than that, we'll come out and see Tommy and Me, and I'll be happy to see you and Frank together on stage, and Fife. That'll be fantastic.
It's a different experience, and we do a talk back after every show.
Wow.
We'll be able to hang around and watch that and see us.
Okay.
And the people who come to the theater, these people, it's a whole different. The theater gets bigger with Tommy and Me.
That's wonderful. Okay. Well, Tom Teti, thank you for being on Adventures in Theater History Philadelphia.
Thank you for asking me, Peter.
So that's our episode for today. My thanks again to Tom and to David Ingram, whose voice we heard back at the beginning. David is not only a longtime friend of mine, but also a longtime supporter of this podcast. And I should let you know that as I record this episode, David is in the middle of the run of the Ebony Booth play, Primary Trust, at the Philadelphia Theater Company, directed by Amina Robinson. It is a fantastic production. I caught it during previews, so please go and see it if you can. If you're in the Philadelphia area, I highly recommend it. Playing the character of Kenneth in that production, A Primary Trust, by the way, is the great local actor Newton Buchanan. Newton told me afterwards that he got his professional training at the Hedgerow Theatre Company in Rose Valley, where one of his acting teachers was none other than Tom Teti. So it all comes around full circle, doesn't it? As Tom mentioned during the interview, he himself is about to do another run in the play Tommy and Me by Ray Didinger at People's Light and Theatre Company in Malvern, where it will be running from October 7th to the 19th, 2025. I'll put a link to the People's Light website in the show notes. If you've been enjoying this entire season of the podcast, or have any thoughts or suggestions, or hey, compliments, drop me an email at aithpodcast@gmail.com. I'd love to hear from you. If you're new to this podcast and are just starting to listen, well, welcome aboard. Be sure to subscribe to us on whatever app you're using, because in a couple weeks, we'll be back with yet another fascinating interview, this one with Seth Rosen, the founder and longtime artistic director of the Interact Theatre Company. To support this show yourselves and to listen to our monthly bonus episodes and other special members-only content, go to www.patreon.com/AITH podcast. Again, the link is in the show notes. And for everyone, at no charge at all, folks, there will be additional images and information, as always, in the episode blog on our website, www.aithpodcast.com. Or, a free and easy way to support us is to leave a review about this show on Apple Podcasts or right on the website. And of course, you can follow us on Facebook or Instagram or Blue Sky, all places on social media where we post new information about Philadelphia theater history almost every single day. So, this is Peter Schmitz. Our theme music and transitions are composed by Christopher Mark Colucci. Additional music is supplied by Epidemic Sound. Thanks to all of you for listening today and for coming along on another adventure in theater history, Philadelphia.